taking the witness stand. For the legal profession, and maybe even the jurors to some extent, it's interesting, right? It starts to fill in the blank. It starts to connect the pieces of the puzzle. There is a whole different thing if Stormy Daniels walks into that courtroom, if Karen McDougal walks into that courtroom. What is their legal importance to this case potentially? And is it possible they won't testify, do you think?
You know, I think they will, Chris, and undoubtedly they're going to bring the drama. They're going to bring the intense interest and perhaps some salaciousness to the jury's attention. They're really important witnesses, and folks, you know, shouldn't forget that prosecutors put lots of witnesses on who aren't blockbuster witnesses or who don't necessarily produce some of the most directly incriminating evidence against the defendant, but they are all part of the story, kind of the criminal tapestry that the prosecutors are trying to weave here. And here's where I think the Karen McDougals and the Stormy Daniels are going to be real danger zones for Donald Trump. As best I can tell, Donald Trump and his lawyers have never conceded that Donald Trump had a relationship with either woman. The closest the defense attorneys came, Todd Blanche, in opening statements, he said, ladies and gentlemen, Stormy Daniels' testimony doesn't mean anything. It's not important. That's a sign that he believes it's probably potentially really damaging because he's already trying to steer the jurors away from her testimony. But it is important because if the jury comes to believe that Donald Trump, in fact, had this somewhat long-term relationship with Karen McDougal and this one encounter or a short-term relationship with Stormy Daniels, it will paint a picture of a defendant whose stock and trade is concealment and deception and lying. It may not be directly relevant to the falsifying business records charges to gain unfair advantage in the 2016 election, but it will still do potentially real serious damage to Donald Trump in the eyes of the jurors.
I want to get your take on something that Financial Times U.S. national editor Edward Luce said earlier this morning on Morning Joe, and he talked about the toll that all of this is taking on Donald Trump.
The final impact of this trial is just the psychological effect on Trump, sitting there without his cell phone, being told to sit down, you know, practically having to ask for a bathroom break, and awaiting Stormy Daniels, the scenario of his nightmare, testifying in front of him.
How does a defense and, frankly, a prosecution lawyer deal with what you see in the defendant, and how might that impact the trial as the jury watches very closely?
Yeah, you know, the jurors will pick up on everything that goes on in that courtroom, and much of it is nonverbal. They are absorbing important information about the defendant, Donald Trump, in the way he behaves in court, in how he reacts, even if not verbally, to what the witnesses are saying about evidence that may be deeply incriminating. And I'll tell you, Chris, the defendants that I prosecuted, I saw it wear on them, wear on their family members. I've always said there are no winners in criminal trials. You know, accountability is a must, and justice must be done, particularly to vindicate the rights of the victims. But, you know, it can tend to wear on everybody, sometimes no more than the defendant himself. And let's face it, we have a contempt hearing coming up where it may go from bad to worse, because the minute Judge Merchan holds Donald Trump in criminal contempt in violation of the laws of New York, that will represent a violation of his release conditions in all 4 of his criminal cases. So I think things are about to actually get significantly worse for Donald Trump.
The trial